today's event. I'm just going to give people another minute or so to get into the meeting, and then we'll kick off. Great. Well, we're now at 2 minutes past 1, and I think we've got almost half of our intended audience into this virtual space. So now's probably a good time to open the meeting. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this fantastic event in celebration of International Women's Day, which was yesterday. My name is Shema Tariq. I'm a consultant in HIV and sexual health at Mortimer Market Centre, which is one of the largest sexual health clinics in the UK. And I'm also an academic working at the Institute for Global Health. My research really focuses on HIV and women, and a lot of my research is focused on HIV and menopause. So what happens when our periods end? Personally, why am I here? Well, I'm a cisgender woman who spent well over half my life having periods. And I'm really looking forward to having a rich conversation with our panelists today. So what I'd like to say is that during this event, we'll be covering a whole spectrum of what it means to have periods, what it means to not have periods. We'll be talking about subjects such as period poverty, about what it's like to have periods if you are not a cisgendered woman, what it's like to have to seek termination in places where access to termination is really limited, and also engaging with what it's like to be living with HIV and to experience menopause. So obviously a subject that's close to my heart. I know that Lucy, who's one of the organisers of this event, is going to put some etiquette into the Zoom chat, which I'd really encourage you to read. For my part, and on behalf of the panelists, what I would like to say is that we acknowledge that the concept of gender is a subject of heated debate within academia and certainly within UCL of late. It's also been a heated topic of debate more widely in society. Collectively, as a panel, we would like to openly state that our definition of woman is trans inclusive. We believe collectively that trans women are women. Now, we realise that there are people in the audience who may think differently, but we want today's event to be a safe space, and we would urge everyone to be respectful when they're engaging what I know is going to be a really rich discussion. I'd also like to add that we will be discussing trans men's experience of having periods. Now, I know for some of you that might feel counterintuitive or uncomfortable at an event which is here to celebrate International Women's Day. But I'd like to remind everyone in this virtual room that as an institute, we are committed to improving the health and well-being of people, regardless of gender, ethnicity, and sexuality. Trans men are amongst the most marginalised groups in society, and I would suggest that if we don't talk about their periods in a space like this, then where would we discuss them? And I doubt it's going to be high on the agenda for International Men's Day. So with that in mind, I would really like to kick off today. So I'm going to start off by introducing a video by one of my colleagues, Asma Ashraf. So Asma is going to be showing her film. It's part of a campaign for Karma Nirvana, a charity that supports those who are impacted by honor-based abuse. During this video, Asma will be talking about not menstruating, so not having a period. And this is part of her experience as an intersex person, which is really relevant to all our discussions today. Asma works as a volunteer with Karma Nirvana. She's an academic based here at Institute for Global Health and is part of the organising committee for today's event. This film was filmed by the University of Derby, and I'm really, really excited that we're going to be sharing this to kick off today's event. Over to you, Asma.
I was born in the UK, in the south of England. My parents moved here from Pakistan, my dad in the 1950s and my mum in 1970s. From about the age of 10, I began to realise that my life, as I thought it was my life, I wouldn't have the choices that I thought I would have. I kind of realised that I wouldn't be able to choose whether I got married or not. And it became apparent when my mum said, "Oh, you've got to learn to cook and clean." And I don't remember asking why, but I got the message that it's because you're being prepared for a marriage. I went to school because we had to go to school because we lived here. But then hearing conversations about, actually overhearing conversations that I was going to be possibly marrying this person or marrying that person, and then people teasing me, my uncles teasing me, saying, "Oh, you're going to marry a stranger. They're going to be horrible to you." And you're a young teenager, and you think, "Oh my God, this is really scary. How am I supposed to deal with this?" And then you try and tell your parents, "I don't want to do this." And they think she's either being respectful by saying she wants to stay with her parents, or they think, "No, stop being silly. This is every girl's destiny. This is the way you've got to go." Basically, there was this threat that if I stepped out of line, that I would be taken away, because I'd heard that this has happened to other girls, and taken out of the country, out of the UK to Pakistan, and left there until I was ready to be married, or no one. My parents never said that, but that's how I was led to believe my life would go if I wore makeup, or if I wanted to cut my hair or something like that, or if I didn't listen to my parents. During this time, I was so afraid of being whisked off in the night, and because this is the kind of thing I'd heard, I would just read into the hours. I would read anything. I was a voracious reader. I would read, and my mum would come in and say, "Are you going to turn your light off?" And I'd say, "No, I'm going to read." And I'd read until about 3 or 4 in the morning, and then I'd be going to school. And it kind of helped with I love reading books, so it did kind of help me to survive as well, if you like. When I was about 16, my mum thought, well, she's not had her periods. And my sisters had started when they were 12, and I was 16, and so a few years behind in terms of not having a period. And she took me to the GP. It was discovered that actually I had a condition that I was born with, which left me infertile. And my mum was absolutely, she was gutted that was the case, because she'd had this plan for me to get married, and suddenly she, and probably my dad, because I didn't talk to my dad about this, my mum would have spoken to him, had to do an about turn and think, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" I remember someone saying to her, "You shouldn't have done these tests, because if you didn't know, it would have become the other person's problem, that she couldn't have children." But I think my mum didn't want that. I think she wasn't happy that I couldn't have children, but I think she then felt they couldn't burden me with anyone else. And I felt, it was a horrible, but actually it saved me from having a marriage that I didn't want, a forced marriage. Because we went to Pakistan, and I was really scared that summer, thinking, "Oh my God, although I can't have periods," and one investigation showed this, they were taking me to these wise men, or whatever they're called, these, I can't remember the term, but they would take me, and this one person held my pulse for, I don't know how long, a minute, if that, and said, "Oh yes, there's a bone obstructing her reproductive system. Take her back to England." And I remember thinking, "Oh yes, he said take her back to England, so I will go back to England and ask them to remove the bone, and then she'll be fine. She'll be fertile." And I don't believe what you're saying, but I thought, if you're saying I can go back to England, that's fine, because my uncle was saying, "No, she's got to stay here, because she's too old to go back to England." But my dad was saying, no, you've got to come back. At the time, I didn't care that I couldn't have children. But I was 16. It wasn't what I wanted. But later on, when I realised it led to me feeling a bit sad and upset about it. But at the time, it's what saved me.
So welcome back, everybody. I want to take a moment to really just pay tribute to Asma for such courageous sharing and really giving us an insight into the difficulties that are experienced by people who are non-binary, and also highlighting a lot of themes that I think we will pick up in our discussions today. So things that I'm thinking about in response to this video is, what does it mean to have a period? What does it mean symbolically to not have a period? What does it mean to not have a period in a society where the definition of womanhood is tied up with your ability to have children? And then also this very close coupling of periods, not having periods, your ability to reproduce, and how it links with honour-based violence. And I think all of these subjects are worthy of discussion today. I'm conscious that there are issues that Asma has raised during her really powerful video that people may find difficult, and it may stir up some difficult experiences themselves. So at the end of today's event, we will be signposting to a variety of support organisations, and I would urge you to, if there is anything that's difficult for you personally, to get in touch with one of us. Okay, so moving on to our panel. I'm really delighted that we have such a fantastic panel joining us today to really dig into some of the topics that I've already touched upon. I am not going to introduce each panel member because I think they can do a really great job of introducing themselves and their and the work that they are currently engaged with. Each one of them is going to give a different perspective on what it means to have or not have periods. So we're going to start by turning to Tara Akindele, who's one of our students here at the Institute for Global Health. So Tara, I'm going to invite you to take the virtual stage and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Thanks, Shema. Hi, everyone. So my name is Tara, and I'm currently studying global health and development at UCL. I run a nonprofit organization called Flow Haven, and that organization is aimed at ending pure poverty in Nigeria. So today I'm going to talk about, the work that we do, our mission, and why we're doing what we're doing. So thank you all for joining, and I'm just going to be sharing some slides with you all. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So as I said, hello everyone and welcome and thanks for joining. My name is Tara. I'm going to be talking to you about Flow Haven. So Flow Haven is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 to end pure poverty in Nigeria. We do this by providing safe, eco-friendly menstrual products and menstruation education to the women and girls in Nigeria. So here are some interesting facts about pure poverty in Nigeria. In Nigeria, a pack of menstrual pads costs an average of 85 pence, even as an estimated 44% of Nigeria's population, 87 million people, lives in extreme poverty, earning less than £1.32. Let that sink in. About 25 million girls in Nigeria experience period poverty during their menstruating years. So I'm sure some of you are wondering, what is period poverty? So period poverty is a lack of access to clean, safe menstrual products due to financial constraints. Period poverty isn't just about affordability. but also about the lack of knowledge about menstrual hygiene. In relation to taboo, the concept of menstruation is still a taboo topic in most parts of the world. This taboo causes a major deficiency in the conversations around menstruation and reproductive health products, and a lack of the information for most menstruators around the world. So what is our mission? So our mission is to destigmatize menstruation by providing safe, sustainable menstrual products and menstrual health education to underprivileged girls and women in Nigeria. Fun fact, Flow Haven is a play on the word love. At Flow Haven, we believe that there's enough love to go around, that every individual deserves education, equality, and dignity. So how do we achieve our goals? So we align ourselves to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to end pure poverty in Nigeria. The goals we focus on are good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, reduced inequalities, and climate action. And I'm going to talk about how we implement this in our projects and in our goals. So Flow Haven advocates for sustainability, and we do that in more ways than you might know. Fun fact is that our menstrual kit bags, which you can see here, are made by the women in the communities that we partner with. We use sustainable products and provide sustainable sources of income for the women in our partner communities. Another one of our goals in Flow Haven is quality education. During our outreach initiatives, we distribute menstrual kits and educate the girls in communities and schools with the Flow Haven curriculum. This curriculum focuses on destigmatizing periods by increasing conversations around periods and providing accurate information on reproductive health. Ultimately, our menstrual kits allows the girls to continue their education without having to worry about the cost to access periods. So as you can see, our volunteers are here teaching the girls in schools and in communities about menstrual hygiene management and menstrual health advocacy. So we at Flow Haven, one of our biggest aims and one of our biggest goals is to provide chemical and plastic-free menstrual products to the girls and the women that we distribute to. As we explained, climate action is one of our goals. And within our menstrual kit bags, you'll find biodegradable organic pads, liners, period trackers, and menstrual cups. We want to see a sustainable future and improve the social and environmental well-being in the community. According to ActionAid, 1 in 4 women don't have access to period products. But with Flow Haven, we've been able to reach out to 260 menstruators with our initiative since we started in 2020. As you can see, here are more pictures of the girls that we've reached out to and our volunteers again. So one of our goals is to provide clean water and sanitation to the communities that we partner with. And currently, one of the key things that we're working on in Flow Haven is the Borehole Project. As you can see here on the right, is just kind of an illustration of what we're looking to do. So we found out from our outreaches that lack of access to safe water and sanitation significantly affects the health of everyone in our partner communities. The World Bank found that 60 million Nigerians were living without access to safe drinking water, 60 million Nigerians. And through our Borehole Project, menstruators in the Agege community, which is a community that we partner with in Lagos State, Nigeria, will have access to clean water and maintain good and personal menstrual hygiene. So here is one of our team members, Victoria. She's our project team lead. And if you'd like to know more about the Borehole Project, there is going to be a link in the chat box for you to just check out our website and to know more about what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. So whilst we're proud of the impact we've made and the plan to make, there is still so much more to be done to end pure poverty in Nigeria. And we cannot do it alone. As it popularly is said, it takes a whole village. So we need your support and donations to achieve our goal in ending pure poverty in Nigeria. If you'd like to donate to our cause, There will be a link put in the chat box for you to make some donations. If you'd like to do it via our bank details are on the screen and will be put in the chat as well. So thank you. And for more information about the work that we're doing, please visit our website, flowhaven.org. The link should be put in the chat as well. If you'd like to know more about why there's a need for an intervention in period poverty, there's a documentary that I did to highlight a need for an intervention, and that link as well will be put in the chat box. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel because we tend to post videos on the work that we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. And in terms of our social media platforms, you can follow us at Flowhaven on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We're very, very active on our social media platforms, particularly on our Instagram pages, where we share a lot about the work we're doing with our Borehole Project and our missions for this year. And if you have any more questions about the work we're doing, you can email us at info@flowhaven.org. Thank you for listening. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them at the panel session later on. Thank you.
Tara, thank you very, very much. Truly, truly impressive work. And I definitely have loads more questions that I want to ask you, and I can see that there's a lot of engagement in the chat, but we will come back to you. So to the audience, we are going to let each panel member introduce themselves and their work, and we will come back and take questions towards the end of today's meeting. But Tara, thank you for your advocacy and for your activism. Really amazing.
Thank you, Shema.
So moving on and covering a different aspect of having periods, I would like to introduce Susanna Hopwood. Susanna, I'm going to hand over the mic to you now.
Thanks, Shema. Can everybody hear me okay?
Perfect.
Thanks. Well, welcome everybody to this afternoon's event, which I think is really quite important. And I think I have a particular role, which is slightly difficult, actually. I've been asked to talk about trans people and periods, but we're talking about trans men in this case, because it probably won't be much of a surprise to you to understand that trans women do not, as a rule, in my experience, they don't have periods, don't menstruate. And so, but when talking about this session, we thought it was appropriate to discuss, well, certainly very important to discuss the issue, because it's a growing issue, but also because doing it in this way, getting me as a woman with a trans history to talk about, was probably more appropriate for what's essentially a women's focused event. But in preparing this presentation, I've taken the advice and talked to various people, but most particularly Michael Toes, Dr. Michael Toes, who is based at the University of Lincoln Medical School, and is well versed. And I've worked with him in various situations about the issues faced by trans masculine people in particular, and trans people in general. So what I want to do is do a very, very quick, clear presentation here. And it's just, I've just got a couple of slides, and the messages I think will be quite clear, because I think we have to be very clear about these messages. First of all, menstruation and transmasculine people is not about trans women. It is about, essentially, and focused on the health and well-being of transmasculine people who menstruate. And we need to think about this, because a growing number of people are identifying as transmasc. A growing number of them wish to retain the capability to have children and are doing so, and giving birth. And a growing number of them are having children either by birth or by egg extraction. So there are two approaches to that. So this is very important to grasp, really. It's a key issue which is evolving, and it's a challenge, I think, a growing challenge for providers of healthcare, particularly obstetrics care. And I do work with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and and shortly they will be producing a green top guideline on the care of gender variant people in general, and obviously picking up issues around obstetrics and gynecology for trans masculine people. Next slide, please. So it's not necessarily straightforward, or we have to break down the groups whom we are talking about in terms of questioning and non-binary people. And I think Asma picked up the issue of non-binary people, in her case, people who are not menstruating, and we have to understand the diversity of the different groups we're talking about here. It's no good having a unitary perspective on this. We're talking about people coming at this from different experiences and different, if you like, physical characteristics and where they are. Now, what I'm talking about here is there are people who are obviously questioning. There are people who are socially transitioning, who menstruate. And when I mean socially transitioning, I think they're wanting to present, they may be on a course which is taking them towards transition, but haven't actually gone in a very clear direction. They may be partially socially transitioned or fully socially transitioned. But as people do it who are doing that, they will continue to menstruate. And then we're moving more fully into a position where people are medically transitioning and will continue to menstruate. Now, medical transitioning, I described some of this in the little briefing note that I've prepared. The fact they continue to take cross-sex hormones, or start to take cross-sex hormones, in this case testosterone, which suppresses menstruation, but it's not a kind of wholly, shall we say, complete process. So people may continue to menstruate. It depends on dosage and so on, and they may stop and they may start. So it's not a kind of consistent process, but we have to understand where people are coming from. And it's, again, I come back to the point, we must think about people in terms of who they are and where they're coming from, and not talk in terms of unitary cohorts of people. And the last but not least category that I've identified here are the people who are fully transitioned and are fully presenting and living as men, but they may continue to menstruate in certain ways. I mean, why? Because they may wish to continue to sustain their ability to have children. So what I want to emphasize here is that in each of these broad groups, people will experience the impact of menstruation in different ways, and the challenges or pleasures that it brings. But I want to talk principally about the people who are in the process of medically transitioning, or are in fact have succeeded and moving towards full medical transition. Can we have the next slide, please? Right. We have to understand actually that menstruation, the impact of menstruation on trans men is not straightforward. It can cause, in the process of transition, considerable distress and reinforce gender dysphoria. And I think this applies to, obviously, to trans women, but not in the context of menstruation, but the question of who you are and how you present, and this question of being of gender dysphoria and whether it's reinforced or not, and how you're perceived. And this comes along with these practical issues about changing and disposal of sanitary towels and tampons. There are male lavatories, in my previous experience, I'm way beyond using male lavatories, but in my previous experience, I don't recollect ever seeing the what should we call it, the things where you can put sanitary towels and tampons inside the cubicles. It's just not there. They are there now increasingly in gender neutral spaces, but not as a matter of course in single sex spaces in men's lavatories. So that is an issue, and it leads into the whole question about privacy in male spaces. And if you're having a period, what do you do about that? So it's about how you sustain your privacy, and that comes back completely to the whole question of stealth. Some of you may not be familiar with that term, but it's actually about how you sustain your identity without being outed, without being sort of, if you're living in, as it were, closeted, you don't want to be outed and sort of people drawing conclusions about what your history is and who you are and so on. There is the issue about, periods are gross, but attitudes amongst trans men, transmasc people are changing. Because more men are electing to retain the ability to menstruate, because they want to sustain their ability to have children, and we have to acknowledge that's an important aspiration, but we have to understand that it brings with it the need to be careful and caring and sensitive to those needs. And I put in there in brackets, does this strengthen the case for gender neutral lavatories? I leave that thought with you. Can we have the last slide, please? So the big message I want to come back to here is that we're not talking about a conflict here. There is no conflict between trans men and women's spaces in this discussion. We've got to be focused on the fact that while having men quotes having periods can be challenging, this is not about intruding on that issue, a woman's issue in the spaces. It's about how we recognize the specific health and hygiene needs and civil rights of trans men in relation to the personal impact of menstruation. It's a real issue and a growing issue, and it's about acknowledging that this is happening, it will continue to happen, and we mustn't actually, and this, I make no apologies for it, it's an imperative. We must acknowledge it and make sure that we don't actually, as it were, push a group of people into an out group. They're not conflicting with women's rights. It is about their rights as citizens and their health and hygiene needs in the context of being trans men who menstruate and may wish to continue to menstruate because they wish to move into childcare and childbearing and having families and doing the kind of things that most of us see as our rights in this society. So this is what I believe, and I think many of us believe, we must be focused on this discussion. Thanks very much.
Susanna, thank you so much. I think this was such a timely discussion to have. We live, thankfully, in an era of increasing recognition of gender diversity. And I think I'm looking back at my own career. So I've been working and delivering sort of sexual health care for nearly 20 years. And I'm aghast actually thinking that this is the first time somebody has drawn my attention to the needs of trans masculine people when it comes to their periods. So I thank you for putting this subject on the table for us to discuss today. And I'm sure there'll be people wanting to ask questions and to try and think through how we can deliver better care to this group of people. So we're halfway through our panelists' introductions. I'm now going to move to Catherine. So Catherine Conlon, who is calling us from over the sea. Catherine, would you like to introduce yourself to us all and then tell us a little bit about your work?
Thank you, Shema, and I'm delighted to be part of the panel today and to have everybody here with us. So I'm a assistant professor in social policy at Trinity College in Dublin, and my research has focused on women's abortion experiences, particularly people living in Ireland, where abortion only became legal in January 2019. So I'm going to share my slides here. Okay, so I think this should be visible now.
Yep, all good.
And I'm talking about when an absent period means an unexpected pregnancy. And I'm drawing on research that I carried out over the past 2 years with people in Ireland accessing abortion care here since abortion became legal in the Irish context. So a very potted history of Ireland's abortion regime. In 1861, when an act of the British Parliament made a procurement of miscarriage or termination of pregnancy a felony under law that extended to the island of Ireland. When Ireland became independent in 1922, that law remained, and while Britain, England and Wales legalised abortion in 1967, in Ireland that did not happen, and in fact in 1983 a constitutional amendment was added by referendum to our constitution that gave an equivalent right to life to the unborn from the moment of conception to the pregnant woman, and that stayed in place until 2018. During that time, people from Ireland, and before the referendum, people from Ireland had travelled for abortion, particularly to Britain, or had more recently accessed abortion by importing medical abortion in pills into Ireland. Lots and lots of detrimental impacts were the effect of that constitutional amendment, and in 2018, the referendum was held to repeal that amendment, and that was successful, and by 66% of the vote voted to change that amendment, to remove that amendment from our constitution. And as these pictures show, those of us who support women's right of access to abortion were joyous, very joyous for sure. This meant that by the 1st of January 2019, abortion was legalised in Ireland. And an interesting aspect of our model of care is how it very much is based on the early medical abortion model. So just highlighting 3 components in particular, in terms of the regulation of abortion access in the Irish context now. Under 12 weeks gestation, abortion is available free of charge and without restriction, but you must attend for 2 consultations with a 3-day wait between the first and second consultation to access abortion care. The primary mechanism and means of abortion is early medical abortion, assuming that the person will take the medication at home. And this assumes that everybody has got a home. So I wanted, in talking with the panel today, to draw attention to some issues that have come up in our data when we were talking with women about their experiences of accessing abortion care under this model over the past 2 years. And just to characterize, I suppose, what people talked to us about was, what is it like when home is where the abortion takes place? And what we heard, the people we talked to refer to, was that self-managing the abortion encompasses a lot of careful planning, careful timing of the taking of the medication, and of arranging a space suitable for the duration of the process. and also the management of the body itself going through the process of the abortion. And people talked about making the environment they would be in as comfortable as possible. And we did hear people portraying a nesting process before taking the pills. And for example, Ruth talked to us about, cleaning her house before taking the second pill, being at home so that she would not have to worry, and preparing, in her case, a second bedroom so that she could have some personal space. So for many people, being able to be at home was comforting and allowed people to be in this presence of loved ones. So for example, Serena's a quote from Serena talked about her partner, who was fully supportive of her, and involved, I suppose, a sense of shared involvement of both of them in the termination, that her partner took the day off work, took the kids to childcare, as if she was going to work, and then he came home and we spent that day in bed watching Netflix, talking or whatever. So very much a sense of feeling control of the environment, control of the process, and involvement of her partner as well. But for those people going through the care model in the Irish context, for some it wasn't easy to organise their abortion at home, and others for whom it was easy still reflected on what this model of care asked for of a person who was having an abortion. And it asked the person to have a safe, comfortable space where they could carry out the abortion. So where people were living in shared homes, where they did not want the person they were living with to know about their abortion, for example, with parents or with friends, we did hear people talk about, making another environment available to themselves, like booking a hotel or staying with friends or partners. And we did hear people talk about what is it like to undergo an abortion and seek abortion care under the home-based model when you share a home with an abusive partner. And that was the case for Diane, the quote on the bottom right. We talked about the abusive partner she lived with, who was actually in her home and she was taking the abortion medication. And Diane had purposefully not wanted her partner to know about the pregnancy because she was afraid he would insist she would proceed with the pregnancy and entrap her and her children for a longer time in the abusive relationship than she hoped she would be able to escape it sooner if that pregnancy did not go ahead. So she said, he was here when I took the tablets. It was really awkward. You have to hold them in your mouth for, as she recalled it, for half an hour. I was in the shower trying to avoid him doing it. And I was like, oh, my period is due. I knew I was going to be bleeding. Within a matter of hours, I was like, oh, my period is due and all of this. And he was just like, Jesus Christ, you're dying. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm grand. They're just gone really bad. So we heard women talk about those parallels between the abortion process and periods. And then within our data, I just wanted to share some of the ways in which people talked in the study about self-managing the bodily materials that were generated by the termination process. And this is data that we're continuing to work through in the study team. So just to share it with you today, the top right, Fiona talked about, I was really pale. I felt really bad from the mifepristone, that first pill, and I was really, really weak. And my employer saw me and they sent me home, luckily, because when I was collecting my bag and everything, the blood started. And Una talked about the second pill that started contracting the womb. And that did start within, after I swallowed the tablets, 15 minutes, it all started. And oh my God, it's a painful process. And loads of awful, yes, scary actually to look at, but that's what's happening and all that. It's very graphic type of thing. Like they said, it's the heaviest period ever. One of the things we noted in the data was how language failed people, so that the embodied process and the embodied experiences that people were going through were experiences and processes that we don't have language for very easily. Aoife talked about, I saw the little sack. I knew I got a really, really bad cramp. And I don't know whether that was just because I've had kids and I'm used to seeing the scans. But for me, you could see the tiny, and not upsetting or anything, but just, and I was actually just, I suppose I was kind of glad. And then Fia says, I just sat there waiting and I got on with my day and nothing seemed to happen. I had no pain, no cramping. And that's, maybe 4 or 5 hours later, I started to get really worried, thinking this hasn't worked. And then of course the phone comes out and I start Googling, what if it doesn't work? And I know I shouldn't have, but I was getting really worried at that point. And I started to have light bleeding, but nothing like a period. And I was really convinced it wasn't happening. So constantly the the continuity between period and termination was referred to in the talk of the people in the study. So, as I say, that the data that we, I've just looked at there, and other data similar to that, which is talk of people who are portraying that embodied process of termination, is data that we're continuing to work with and will be publishing on. But things that we're hearing in the data and hearing people, convey and ask, how can we be heard about? How can we be heard about feeling glad about our abortion, or feeling sad about our abortion, or about the embodied process of abortion, including ways we engage with the materials that are expelled by our bodies during abortion, or wanting to share our experiences with others, or not wanting to share them, or wanting surgical or not medical abortion, or wanting abortion in advanced gestation. So we'll continue working with that data, and hope to have more conversations about it with you and others from after today. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. You managed to pack in so much stuff in 5 minutes, giving us a potted history of abortion laws in Ireland, as well as really getting us to think about what it means to have abortion at home, which is often, certainly in the UK, there's been a lot of debate on abortion at home recently, because during COVID, women were entitled to have medical termination at home, and now the government has decided to not let that continue. So we have this assumption that everyone would want to have termination at home. And thank you for really interrogating that with us today. So I'm going to move on to our last panel member. It is my delight to introduce both a friend and a colleague, Susan Cole, who is going to talk to us about HIV and menopause. So Susan, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's been an absolutely fascinating session so far, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion we're all going to be having very soon. So my name's Susan Cole. I lead the community engagement and broadcasting activities for the HIV information charity NAM AIDS Map, but I've been active in HIV activism, journalism, advocacy, and just all different aspects, working for a number of different organisations for about 20 years. And I'm going to be talking today in both my professional capacity as someone working in HIV, but also in a personal capacity as a woman living with HIV. I was diagnosed almost 25 years ago through a routine immigration test in America. I just got married to my second ex-husband. I've had 3 so far. I collect them a bit like shoes and handbags. So on the lookout for ex-husband number 4 very soon, if anyone knows anyone. And part of the process is just having an HIV test, and it didn't cross my mind for a moment that it could possibly come back as positive. And the way I received my diagnosis was the doctor said, barely able to look up at me, shuffling papers. He said, the good news is you don't have syphilis, but the bad news is you're HIV positive and you have about 7 years to live. My children were 4 and 7 at the time, so you can imagine how traumatic that was. Yeah, what really helped me was getting information about HIV, and I realized that actually he was wrong. And there's been tremendous advances in HIV over the years, that it's impossible for us to pass HIV onto our sexual partners. If we're on effective medication, we can have children born free of HIV. We could do any job that we want, yet there's still so much stigma around HIV, particularly in relation to our blood. And that very much includes menstrual blood. If you Google HIV and periods, one of the first things that comes up is, can you catch HIV from blood on a toilet seat. And obviously that isn't the case, but that's the way that HIV and periods are regarded by many people. I've spoken to a number of women with HIV about how we feel about periods, and often we can experience stigmatizing events. Like for instance, I mean, I'm sure many of us are aware that sometimes when we have sex, our periods can start, and that shouldn't be a big deal. It's just a natural thing. However, for women living with HIV, a number of women have shared that if a man comes in contact with our menstrual blood, many men act like it's the end of the world and it's something, particularly disgusting and shameful. I know of one situation where a man said, "Oh my goodness, am I going to get AIDS now because I've come in contact with your blood?" And you can imagine how traumatic and how stigmatizing that can be. And it can also lead to self-stigma in women living with HIV who may feel shame because of their periods and what that might represent. However, the absence of periods can also be really traumatic for many women living with HIV as we go through the menopause. Research has shown that women living with HIV may experience the menopause a little bit earlier, and we may have worse symptoms. So sometimes when our periods stop, it can be really traumatic, particularly for women who are childless, not through choice. Many women living with HIV historically, and in some settings it still happens today, is that we can be discouraged from having children because of the fear that we would pass HIV onto our children. I mean, I can say that I've got 4 kids, 2 I had before I had HIV and 2 after, and all of my children are HIV negative, and the chance of us transmitting HIV onto our children is absolutely tiny, but it can be really problematic if we're perceived as somehow risking our children if we go on to have them. When I was pregnant with my son, who is 16, I did a naked cover of a magazine to show that women with HIV can go on and have children born free of HIV, and it was fantastic. They actually airbrushed out my cellulite and everything like that. So it was, I was quite happy with the cover. But I actually, a woman got in touch with me and said that her doctor had been telling her that she needed to have a termination because she was HIV positive. And when she saw that cover and when she read the article, she realized that actually women with HIV can have children, and she went ahead and went ahead with her pregnancy, and her child was HIV negative. But a number of women with HIV I've spoken to have said that when their periods have stopped, if they haven't had children, it can be just extraordinarily traumatic, because that window of opportunity finally recognize that that's gone, that they can't have kids, and it can be a really hard thing to talk about to other people. And women with HIV going through the menopause can face other types of stigma and discrimination, and it can be a really hard thing to talk about, particularly in relation to the menopause and sex, because often we're not regarded as sexual beings, or that we should be thinking about sexual pleasure if we have HIV. So, we're frequently not supported in that area. And I know that's something that we're going to be discussing a little bit more with with Shema, and the lack of research about HIV and the menopause was really problematic for many of us until Shema came along with the PRIME study, which has been an absolutely tremendous and incredibly important piece of research that has looked at every different aspect of HIV and the menopause and has been incredible for many of us. But I'd like to end by saying that we women with HIV, despite the challenges that we face, we are not passive, voiceless victims that need people to speak on our behalf. You know, we are very able to speak up for ourselves, and it's incredibly important that we are involved in a meaningful way in every aspect of research, development, policies, and our care, and in terms of areas that affect us. And I'd like to just end with a phrase from ACT UP, activist group for HIV at the time when there wasn't HIV treatment. Nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Susan, thank you. That was tremendous. You probably can't see the chat, but there's a lot of appreciation for your search for your fourth ex-husband in the chat. And thank you for really thinking about and getting us to think about what it means to have periods and not have periods. And I'm thinking about how already periods are seen to be dirty, polluting, highly stigmatized, and in many sort of religious cultures that's the case as well. And you've just added that extra layer of complexity about how that plays out in the context of HIV, but also symbolically what it means to not have periods, and certainly with this sort of tie to the loss of being able to have children. So thank you. So many strands to pick up over the next half an hour or so. So could I ask, I think all the panel have their cameras on, which is fantastic. And if you could unmute yourselves as well, because I'd rather we just had a conversation than me having to go to each of you in turn. So I want to leave enough time to take questions from the audience, but before we do that, I thought we could just start by having a conversation just between ourselves. So first of all, I want to pose a question to the whole panel, and then I'm going to go to each panelist individually with one or two questions, if that's okay. And the first question I want to pose to all of you is, could you just for a minute or two share with us, what does womanhood mean to you, or what does it mean to you to be a woman in 2022? So Tara, maybe I'll start with you.
Thanks, Shema. Being a woman to me means being able to be powerful and assertive, yet kind at the same time. So it means being compassionate and vulnerable towards, those that we love without feeling weak for being so, because society always makes us feel weak for, loving wholeheartedly. It means to me striving for your goals, even at the face of adversity that we may encounter along the way. It means, having the wisdom to be grateful for, what you have, even though you're still hungry for more, hungry enough for growth. Yeah, that's what it means to me.
Tara, I love that. I'm just actually trying to note that down, to be grateful for what you have and to remain hungry for more, because I'm going to wheel that out regularly from now on. Susanna, the same question to you. What does it mean to you being a woman? What does womanhood mean to you?
Well, I've come to womanhood in a rather different way, I guess, than most of the rest of you. I sort of spent the first 63, 64 years of my life as a man. And that carries with it all sorts of experiences right the way through. And then to transition into womanhood, it gives you a perspective on what's good. Now, I don't regret for one moment that I spent those years as a man, because they were very rich for me. I've as a result of it, I got friends. I've got a wife who I've been partnered with and now subsequently married to for 40 odd years. And I have grandchildren and children and so on, and a friendship network. And so, I'm not going to turn my back on that. However, coming into womanhood, as I think is a good way of describing it, it's a very different experience. It's a very rich experience. It brings you into a set of relationships with other people, and particularly with women, which is totally different to the relationships you have as a man. So, and I really relish that, because my relationships with women, I think now as a woman, are much more, much richer and warmer, and we share more. There's a kind of sharing that you get with women, which is much deeper and more profound. I'm reluctant to sound pretentious here, but it is a very different experience, having moved across from, as it quotes, from one side to the other. And I really relish that. And having arrived where I am now, in a kind of late in womanhood at the age of 74, I think it's an extraordinarily rich and engaging experience, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to live the last part of my life in that way.
Susanna, thank you for that, and that is such a rich insight for us as well, having had that experience of having lived as a man, and now I love the idea of coming into womanhood, and again something that I'm going to take forward now when I talk about this. Catherine, what does being a woman mean to you, or womanhood?
Yeah, thanks, Shema. I'm conscious I grew up and I live as a cis heterosexual white able-bodied woman in a relatively rich country who has had the benefit of a very good education. So a lot of privilege attaches to me, and yet one of the things about being a woman is that you constantly realize the ways in which women are restricted and silenced. I was struck in Asma's video about the way she portrayed, we grow up as young girls, as young people, and we think the world's at our feet. And I think one of the things that strikes me, while I'm delighted with all of the very positive ways in which we do depict our womanhood and celebrate it, I am constantly disheartened when I do encounter lots of ways in which my daughters and myself and my colleagues and my friends, for their womanhood, encounter obstacles or silences or stops, and ways we have to be resilient. So I'm very, very glad for feminism. I'm very glad for my sisters. I'm very glad for my, all of the women, my biological and my, sisters in womanhood. But yeah, I guess being a woman requires a lot of resilience. I think what Susanna's saying about, ways in which we share and support each other, I think, yeah, we do that, and really, really importantly that we do. And for women who are cut off and isolated because of being in abusive relationships, or, for many, many reasons, that are without that sisterhood, that's really, really difficult. So yeah, I think womanhood, we need International Women's Day. We still need notions of, feminism is over. I think, that being a woman means needing feminism, I think, for me.
I think you're right. And it's got me thinking, Catherine, about, I I opened up Instagram this morning. You probably don't open up Instagram. It's just telling everyone how old I am. I looked at Instagram this morning, scrolled through, and there was a woman who'd posted something as, "Who needs International Women's Day?" And I looked at her account, and she's sort of middle class, cisgender, white woman, you know, not working sort of within sort of either academia or healthcare, or sort of providing sort of, you know, services to people. And I just thought, well, of course you wouldn't think we we needed International Women's Day, but I think today's event has really shown us why we still do, because it gives us an opportunity to really have these discussions and to showcase aspects of womanhood that go ignored. So yeah, we do. I absolutely agree with you. I think womanhood does mean feminism and International Women's Day as much as all the good bits about being a woman. Susan, last but not least, what does being a woman mean to you?
Oh my goodness, everyone's answers have been just so powerful and impactful, and it's like one of the problems of going last. So I'd say like everything everyone else has said, but I'd like to just like build a little bit on intersectionality and womanhood. As a Black woman living with HIV, I'm conscious that we face intersecting forms of stigma, discrimination, disadvantage. I mean, I'm very conscious of my economic privilege that shields me from many of the most abhorrent types of discrimination that particularly migrant women living with HIV face. But I feel as a woman with HIV, there's a really strong community of sisterhood and solidarity of women with HIV. And of course, HIV is people generally with HIV face just awful, abhorrent discrimination. But for women living with HIV, I do feel that there is something quite unique to our experience, and the support and the peer support that women with HIV experience is incredibly important. And I would just say, I'd just like to add on what I was saying before, that, you know, it's really important that we are meaningfully involved, women with HIV, in all aspects, and our voices are heard.
Thank you, Susan. You see, you did have a lot to say. You thought you didn't. But no, I mean, I think drawing the attention to the importance of intersectionality and how feminism now cannot overlook the intersecting influences that shape womanhood and that shape women's oppression or women's success. So, and I think HIV really brings a focus to that, doesn't it? Because you do have this sort of the intersections of not only HIV status and gender, but also often ethnicity, social class, and all of these things sort of almost magnified within the HIV context. And I think we can learn a lot from HIV, actually, certainly in terms of peer support, in terms of activism, and in terms of, you know, meaningful inclusion of people with lived experience in research or service design. I have so many questions to ask all of you, but I don't want to be selfish, because this is an event that is open to other people, and we have 50 people still in the room. But I will ask each one. I am going to take chair's privilege and ask each one of you one question specifically, and this is really, you know, my responses to your work and what you've shared with us today. So Susan, to you first. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what is specifically different about experiencing menopause as a woman living with HIV?
Yeah, I mean, we've learned so much more from your research, Shema. It's the gift that keeps on giving. But I think quite a lot of the issue is that women with HIV just don't know what to expect. There's a great deal of uncertainty about it in terms of, are we going to experience it earlier? Are our symptoms going to be worse? And a major issue is that so many healthcare providers just don't know enough. So we experience being ping-ponged between our going to our GP with issues perhaps related to the menopause, and they say, oh no, that's not the menopause, it's your HIV status. Or we have other healthcare providers and other disciplines, and we get ping-ponged between them. And then also it's the issue of just not being heard when we speak up, particularly Black women living with HIV, when we speak up about our symptoms and our problems, that it's not taken seriously, we're not believed, we're not offered support, or we're told that we can't have HRT because we have HIV, or if we are experiencing other issues and we need to get counselling and support, it's something that's not offered to us. So there's so many different aspects, and I think it's, you know, crucially important that the experiences are listened to and amplified, and we're just taken seriously and believed.
Thanks, Susan. I'm sure that's going to be really helpful for the audience to really just begin to understand why menopause may play out differently for women living with HIV. And what you've just said about not being believed, it's a wider issue, isn't it? Because it's that issue of women of colour not having adequate pain relief and not being believed when they're in pain, or women who have endometriosis being ignored for years. I forget the statistic, it's something like it can take an average of 7 to 10 years, can't it, for a woman to be, 8 years, someone very helpfully has put in the chat. Thank you, Rebecca, for prompting me there. But it takes an average of 8 years to be diagnosed with endometriosis. And it speaks to that concept of testimonial injustice, when people as a group who are already experiencing marginalisation don't get heard and their experiences are belittled. So thank you for raising that. Catherine, I'm going to move on to you, because when I was listening to you talk, read those powerful accounts of the reality, the physical reality of having a termination or having sort of medical termination at home, and that embodied experience. And it made me I was drawing parallels with other aspects of women's lives to do with blood loss. So, you know, women having heavy periods and the stigma associated with, you know, soaking through your clothes or soaking through the bed sheet. And I'm also thinking about women's accounts of miscarriage, and you know, how many women aren't prepared for the physical reality of miscarriage. And there's a real silencing, isn't there, about the realities of our bodies? And I wondered if you could comment on that a little bit more.
Yeah, Shema, it is definitely something that, you know, the research that I've done multiple times now, you know, I sit with women who are telling, because that's the method we use. We ask people to tell us about their experience. But actually, as a method for social research, it's actually quite incomplete, because the language just isn't there. So we have, you know, we sit with women and they start telling us, and they use a lot of gestures and they use a lot of inchoate sounds, because there's no words. The only words that are there are very clinical words, and they belong to the clinical community, and we're entitled to use them. And actually, they don't fit us anyway. We don't like the words. They're very sanitized, they're very hard, they're very cold, they're very clinical, and they don't map onto our experiences. And so, you know, in this research, when people were talking to us about their abortion experiences and that self-management process, because the other research I had done, usually women were in clinics and the abortion was being managed, I suppose, with them, or at least or for them. But here they were managing it themselves. And many times they would stop and say, do you want to hear this? And then it was, so they had to check, did we want to know? And then they wanted to talk and they wanted to share. And they talked about, wanting to spend time with, the products, again, even you don't have the language, but the products, the material that came from their bodies. Some women wanted to sit with it, others didn't. And, they talked about, like we saw, being glad to see it, being sad to see it, and I guess one of the things that strikes me is that, what happens in our bodies is often not for us to define. It's often defined for us. And certainly in the Irish context, the cultural connotations of abortion have been really heavily written onto our bodies by others who've been trying to regulate our bodies and control it. And then I think of my mother, who told me about, her miscarriage and, having a miscarriage and, knowing that she had lost the baby into the toilet. And she said she phoned her doctor and said, what do I do? Because she had saved it. And he said, oh, flush it away. So instantly it was meaningless and worthless and valueless. But while she was pregnant with it, it was equal to her right to life. So those ways in which there's such inconsistencies as well, it always just makes me feel like, oh, there's a real, it's all about power and control, and that can cause such harm and can cause such leave us so detached from the real kind of experiences that we have. So yeah, I think there's lots of continuities across them, but that the values, external political and power-based values have been put onto components of our lives, our periods, our pregnancies, our births, our miscarriages, our abortions, or whatever, that aren't really of our own making, of our own language, or of our own experiences.
I think you're absolutely right. And it is, it's so easy to lapse into that clinical language, sort of products of conception, which I know when that's applied to miscarriage, it's, somebody's baby. And we do it, I think, as society, because we can't sit with discomfort, we can't sit with pain, we can't deal with women's, the material reality of women's bodies. And I think your data really brings that out so powerfully. And Susanna, I'm going to ask you quite a big question, actually, which is how do we build better sexual and reproductive health services for trans and non-binary people? So services that are safe and services that are accessible. What do we need to do this better?
Well, we had a conversation, a session about this earlier this week with a group in the college, and how do we do it? I mean, you're right, it is a very big question. There are so many different aspects to this, but the one thing that is really absolutely basic to it is the understanding that provision has to be made by both specifically and generally, that people who wish to have who seek support with sexual and reproductive health issues are able to access, trans people are able to access services which they know will either be respectful of their particular position in general terms, so that if they go into a general clinic, they won't be looked at as though they've just arrived from Mars and sort of kind of stigmatized. Or there is provision which is very specific, and there are now a number of clinics and so on around which provide that and have been very successful. And of course, there's Clinic Q at King's and 56T at 56 Dean Street and various others around the country obviously in Brighton, there's some very good stuff going on as well. So it is about sort of providing specific kinds of environments for delivery of care, and that carries with it the implication that the commissioners of services are aware of these things and are responding and respond to the demands for these services and are aware of them, and we don't have to go banging on the door. That, I mean, we should have got to a position now where it is possible to be aware of differing health needs and to start to respond to them, even in the context of the rather difficult environment we find ourselves in. But it can be done, and it is being done. And it's about awareness, particularly awareness by professionals, both professionals who are cisgender, who are straight or whatever, but are prepared to actually think about the issues and think seriously as professionals about the delivery of care in a way which actually gets to people in the right way and enables them to access that care. That's a very, very kind of or superficial answer to your question, actually, Shema, but I mean,
but it's not, Susanna. I think actually, what you've really touched upon some important points, which include, I mean, for there's people in this audience who wouldn't be aware of these, great models of care at Dean Street, at Clinic Q, in Brighton. So actually, I think it's really important that you sort of take this quite high level view of, what is needed to create these safer spaces. And even, today, by just bringing our attention to the needs of transmasculine people is going a long way in terms of educating. What I would like to say is that throughout the meeting, Julia Bailey has been popping some really useful links into the chat for anyone who's interested, including links to guidelines on sexual and reproductive health care for trans people, and I think a link to a workshop as well. So please look through that. We only have 8 minutes left, but Tara, I don't want to leave you out, so I'm going to ask you a final question, but ask you to just maybe answer it sort of quite concisely, if that's okay, because we've got some questions from the audience. And my question to you is, I guess I'm thinking about the situation we find ourselves in at the moment in Ukraine, where we're sort of seeing another major conflict break out. And I'm wondering, with your experience at Flow Haven, what you think the impact of period poverty, which of course is going to affect many women and girls in Ukraine, what is the real impact of period poverty, and why should we take it seriously?
So in relation to Ukraine, I would say obviously conflicts and disasters can leave women and girls, without access to clean and safe menstrual products, like you've established. I think one thing I would say that NGOs need to do is, to mobilize supply chains. So in terms of providing access to, menstrual products, and also providing access to like safe facilities for the women and girls to have, in order for them to, essentially promote good menstrual health. So I think that is a very key thing that, NGOs need to do. And I think it's also, in terms of like globally, what we can do, I think a big thing is national advocacy. So, constantly like raising awareness and, partnering with different NGOs to provide access to these products for, countries that are in conflict, like in this scenario, Ukraine. So
thank you, Tara, and thank you for also addressing that so concisely as well, because that was a big question. We have some audience questions, and I don't know if I'm going to see if the people who want to ask those questions are happy to switch their mics on and their cameras. So I think first up was Julia to Tara. So Julia, are you still there?
Yes. My question was about contraception methods for controlling menstruation bleeding in the Nigerian context.
Tara, did you get that?
yes, I did. Thanks, Julia. So based on like literature that I've seen, the use of contraception in Nigeria is quite low. And that's as a result of like absence of proper education on the subject matter. So I do know that in terms of, you know, like clarity of concept, the clarity of contraceptive knowledge remains a bit of a bone of contention among women and young girls, because of the fact, like I said, the access to proper education is very much limited. So that also in its sense jeopardizes like the social well-being of like the women, especially those who are indisposed to standard medical care. And that in a sense will further increase population and consequently aggravate, you know, the level of poverty in the country. So sadly, as of the moment, like I said, the use of contraceptive in Nigeria is very low due to lack of proper education on contraception in itself. So yeah.
Thanks, Tara. And I think we may be coming back to you for another question in a little while. The next question is to Susan. So Joyce Harper, I think Joyce, you're still in the meeting. Do you want to ask your question directly to Susan?
I am here, so I'm on a very busy road. I'm doing a walking meeting, listening to this wonderful session. Susan, thank you so much. Just a comment about Dr. Hay, the Chinese doctor who decided to edit the embryos of HIV positive men, which, as you clearly said, is not necessary to be done. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I think there's still so much misinformation around HIV, and there just isn't the awareness that HIV has moved on so much. So I mean, it's something that we're hearing, but I think in reality, I remember talk about sperm washing. I always had a vision of like sperm being put in a washing machine and whizzed all around. But it's just, you know, like all my children were conceived naturally. It's not necessary for a couple where one person is living with HIV and on effective treatment and their partner is HIV negative. It's not necessary to use condoms because we cannot transmit it to our partners. There's actually more risk of our partners transmitting things to us, and that's why I would encourage women with HIV to use condoms to protect themselves.
Fantastic, Susan. It's always good to get a plug for U equals U into every, I mean, that's my aim for every single meeting. So thank you, Susan. For those of you in the audience who don't know what U equals U is, it's undetectable equals untransmittable. If you are on HIV treatment and it's successful treatment, you cannot pass the virus on. So you'll hear Susan and I pretty much bang on about that all the time. We are getting to the end of the meeting. I just wondered if there's anybody in the audience who wants to just turn their cameras on, either to share reflections or to ask a question. Rebecca, I can see your hand up. Rebecca, over to you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can, yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't start the video, but I think I'll just ask my question anyway, and I'll try to keep my questions succinct. I have questions for both Susan and Susanna, but I've just signed myself up for the upcoming talk on trans inclusion in healthcare. So I think I'll save that question and direct my question now to Susan. Firstly, thank you so much for your candor and sharing your experiences. I myself am not HIV positive, but I do have 2 non-communicable diseases, and I also live in the intersection as a woman of colour, as well as a queer woman. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the notions and your experience of testimonial injustice. It's something of my interest, particularly with regards to endometriosis and other sort of menstrually linked systems. I do find sort of empowering voices and experiences within the medical system, so within your treatment and diagnosis really important. So I was wondering if you could talk about your experiences within the medical system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, as a Black woman living with HIV, it's something that we experience frequently. For me, I hear a lot of other women talking about just not being believed when they speak about pain. I've had situations where when I had breast cancer, and talking about some of the pain that I was experiencing and it just being brushed away. And also things like at the time when I had breast cancer, I had an oncologist saying to me, so how did you get HIV? And what are you doing not to transmit it to other people? And it can be absolutely I changed hospitals, but so frequently we experience this on such a regular basis that for many women of colour, that so many people just don't bother to speak up anymore, because we think, well, if I speak up about it, will I be believed? And HIV is just one of the many disease areas where women of colour experience testimonial injustice. And I have to say that I believe so much that much of it is rooted in institutional racism. And until we acknowledge that institutional racism exists and is blighting so many of our lives, we're not going to be able to fix it.
Thank you, Susan. If we were in real life, I think there'd be a standing ovation at that this point. Instead, you're going to have to make do with a digital hand clap, which seems slightly lame. I am afraid that we have to bring this meeting to a close, and I really am very sad about that, because we could easily have gone on for another half an hour. I really want to thank all the panelists. You will see, hopefully you can see the feedback, and I'm sure Lucy can share it with you. Amazing feedback from today. So Tara, Susanna, Catherine, Susan, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for your generous sharing. I've learned so much today. Thank you to the organising committee, and thank you to the audience for engaging with us. And yeah, it's been really fantastic. So happy International Women's Day for yesterday, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Shema.
Bye. Bye.